Okay, so hopefully you followed the instructions. You have your app.py code copied into the file and your app.js code copied into this file. And we're working in our React starter directory just because that has this whole environment that allows us to use the Flask backend, this React front end, as well as the framework for live editing and all that. And then hopefully you have your Python app running with Python app.py, and then the front end side of it with npm run start. Now we are going to start by just previewing the application and opening this up into a browser. And I want you to open this up into two different tabs. So just copy paste that URL, and you're going to see why we want to do that. Also open up your developer tools in both of the tabs because we want to be able to see any loggings that are happening. Okay, and I'm going to close the preview here just to make the terminal bigger on my Cloud9 itself. So when we open the preview, what are we seeing now? We're seeing just a header with chat messages and then an input where you can enter a message and then press send. So it's not too different from our to-do list where you had an input and then a button that you clicked in order to add to the list. But now we're going to be using some client-server networking, specifically using like socket.io to pass data around. All right, so a socket connection basically is this bidirectional connection where between the server, which we're talking about is app.py on the Flask backend, and then the client, which is kind of what our browser is running, so our JavaScript code, app.js, they are able to talk to each other, but bidirectionally. So the server can talk to the client can talk to the server. And the client doesn't have to make a request to get some data back. The server can just push data to the client on their own. So let's start with the server side of things and just look at these new lines of code that are showing up in here. At the top, you're going to see we're initializing this variable socket.io with some stuff in it. You don't need to worry too much about it. Just know that you can look this up and in the Flask socket.io docs and see like what exactly it's doing. But it's kind of initializing this socket variable that we're then going to use across the file. Also, if you see at the end, we're calling socket.io.run now. We're not calling app.run, which we've done in the past in order to execute the server. But we are passing in app as an argument, which is basically going to serve as a wrapper to execute our server, but using the socket system that we want. So when a client basically connects to the server and establishes a socket connection, then it's going to emit what we call a connect event. So if you see here at the top of your app.js code, we're creating this variable socket and calling this function IO. When you call this function, then that is going to basically connect to the server that is running. And when that happens, then a connect event is basically sent to the server, and it kind of knows that a user or a client has connected to it. So let's see what's going on over here. At socket.io.onConnect. This kind of looks similar to what we have in our routes. So whenever we want to say like, I want to serve this data at this endpoint, then we would say app.route and then / whatever we want to serve it at. It's a little similar, but not the exact same. We're not serving it at a certain endpoint anymore because we're not doing the request response model. We're talking about an event-driven protocol where we think of everything in terms of events instead of URLs and endpoints. So what this is saying is our server is basically listening for a connect event, which happens when a client connects to this socket connection. And when it kind of hears that event, it's going to run and execute this function below. So this is called onConnect. It could be called anything. And we're simply printing that a user has connected. So actually, if I scroll up in my logs in my terminal on the Python side of things, you're going to see user connected being printed out here. And this is when I was opening up my preview, and I actually opened up 2 different tabs, as well as this mini preview that you were seeing at the beginning, which is why we're seeing 3 different user connected logs coming out in the terminal. So this means that each browser that we have here is actually acting as a separate client that is connected to your server. So we have 3, and I closed one. So now we have 2 different clients or 2 different users that are separately connected with Socket to your server. And this could be the same as maybe you're playing a game against your friend who is like 10 miles away on their own computer. It's the same as if you opened up 2 different tabs on your single browser. Cool. So the connection is made. Now let's actually do something. So let's see what happens when I put in a chat in my first browser. So I'm just going to be like, hey, and then I'm going to send. And here, the hey is kind of popping up on the list, which is great. I actually had some code to, similar to our to-do list, basically just take anything I press and then render it here on our screen. This is all local on our current tab, but how does this work if we want to transfer this message to everybody who is on this kind of chat room? Well, if I open up this other browser tab, then you see that hey was not actually typed in here or done anything, but it's popped up here in the list of messages. And if you look at my logs, I also have something saying chat event received, and here is the message. And let's send something back. So I'm just going to say yo and send. So yo is showing up here. That's expected because it was kind of local. But if I go to my first tab, then yo is also here. And here I see chat event received, and the message was yo. So it's not like on the one that I sent yo on, I'm getting chat message received or anything. So only the other client actually received that message from the server. So this is pretty cool. We have like a chat room working now. And now let's see how this actually works under the hood in our code. So let's start with the server. Or actually, no, let's start with the client because that's kind of where we're doing some action by typing in something and pressing send. So if we go down to our HTML, we have some stuff being rendered. We have our button here, and we have our input similar to before. When I click the button, then we're basically calling this function onClick button, and that is going to be called every time I click that button. So let's see in this function what's happening. I am basically checking if my reference is null. So hopefully it's not because I have set my reference to the input in this line of code later on. And then I'm grabbing the actual message that I've typed in from that reference. So from that input HTML element, you do .value in order to get its text. And then I am simply kind of updating my state variable called messages. This should look really similar to our demo. And updating this using the useState function to update my state variable. I'm taking in the previous value of my state. I'm making a copy of it, but adding in messaged along into this array. So my new message that I just typed in and pressed submit for, that is being added on and tracked in our state variable now. And that is kind of why this message automatically popped up on our UI, because here we're mapping out every single message in our state and returning a kind of a little list item for that given message. So that's cool. That's kind of expected. And that's what we were doing in our to-do list last class. But there is this next line of code, which is actually the key to allowing other browser tabs to be able to see that message that you sent. This is socket.emit. So I'm emitting an event. The first argument is the name of the event. This is called chat. I set that. And then I'm passing in an object with only one value here called message. The value of that key for that key is the message that I had gotten from my input. So whatever I typed in. This object could have all sorts of data in it. So I could call it like other info, and then maybe I want to pass in an ID. Maybe I want a username, and then I'm saying like Naman. So I can pass in all sorts of information here as a part of this chat event that my server is actually going to read. So when you emit this message here from the client, then there has to be somebody on the server side, so your server, listening for that specific event. So I called it chat. If you look here, I actually have a route set to socket.io.on chat. So you have to make sure these two are the same. And whenever the client is emitting this event and the server catches it, then it's going to run this code here. So what's it going to do? It is simply printing out data. So as you can see here, it's taking in an argument, and that argument is basically whatever you passed into the event here. And again, this can be all sorts of information that you want. In this case, it would just have the message. So we're printing that out. Let's make sure that that actually showed up. Let's look through these logs, scroll through, and I actually see message, hey, message, yo. So we were successfully got that event on our server and printed it out. And then we are actually emitting event after we heard this event. So we heard one client say chat, and we actually want to emit chat to all the rest of the clients out there that are on our connection. So all those other browser tabs, in this case, my second tab, we're sending out an event from the server now to the client. And we're similarly doing socket.io.emit. The name of that event is chat. I'm passing in data. So here I'm actually just passing in whatever I got. So the same exact argument, I'm just passing it back down to the rest of my clients. So I'm not changing it here, but I could pass in anything I wanted. If I wanted, I could just be like, say something else here, like message intercepted. And this here would not actually take into account what you got in your argument, but just send something else. But I don't want to do that. I actually want to send the right message that somebody passed up. Broadcast equals true just means I'm broadcasting this to all of my all of the clients. And then including self equals false. I'm saying false here because whoever sent this chat event, whatever client sent that, I don't want to send back down a chat to them about this. They already know that they sent up a message with chat. They already see it on their screen. So there's no need actually to be sending it to that same person. I want to just get all the other people out there who are on this connection. So that's what this line of code is basically saying. I'm listening for an event, and then I'm actually emitting out an event here. And the beauty of this sort of model is that I can emit an event even though the client didn't actually make a request. So the client doesn't necessarily know that they're getting back a chat event at a given time. They don't know that somebody has sent a message. They don't know that somebody has made a chat at any specific time. They're completely kind of agnostic of everything going on somebody else's computer or browser tab or whatever. But this method here is actually pushing something from the server to the client. So whether they ask for it or not, they're getting a new event that they can then use for their information. So here if we go back to the JavaScript, we updated our own state inside of this component whenever we as the client sent a message. But how did the other clients, how did my other browser tab know that there was a new message sent? And how did it update its UI accordingly? Well, we know on the server side that the server emitted back this event chat. But how does the client catch that? This is actually this big line of code right here. So you're going to see socket.on, very similar to socket.io.on on the Python side. And now the client is actually listening for a chat event. So before we were talking about the server listening for an event, now the client is listening for an event from the server. So any emitted event from the server side, the client is listening for. And if it hears that event being emitted, then it's going to run this function right here. This function takes in one argument, and that is whatever data that is being passed down right here that's being emitted. It doesn't have to be the same word. It's just assuming whatever that argument is, I'm taking that and I want to do something with it. So here, if I do receive a chat event, I'm going to log this message and then log the data that I'm getting. And this is why in your tab, you were seeing chat event received and then this object, which was the message from the other person. And then finally, to actually show it on the UI, again, I have my state, which is keeping track of all the messages I'm seeing on my screen. I want to add the messages that somebody else sent onto my screen here, which is why I'm doing set messages. And then again, the same sort of flow that you would see if you sent it yourself. So this is how this list is going to store all messages that are being sent on this public chat room in real time. It's going to be updated. One last thing I want to mention is we're putting this inside this funny use effect. Use effect is basically another React hook similar to use state or use ref. So it's this helper function. And it's basically saying, first thing is it's taking in two arguments. One is a function, which you see here. Two is an array, which here is empty. So what use effect does is it allows you to say when you want to run a certain amount of code in your React component. In this function that you passed in, it's only going to run this function when the array here has some variables that have been updated. So let's say that I put input ref here. That would mean that this function would be executed every time the variable input ref changed. Maybe before it was null and now it's some value. Then when that change happens, then this code is executed. And this is kind of like a side effect. Like if some value is changing out there and I want to know that and run some code when that happens, then you can put that in use effect. In our case, it's an empty array. This basically means that we're only going to run this once. We're not going to wait for anything to update because there's nothing in here. And we're only going to run this when the component mounts, so that first stage. And we're putting this function here because socket.on is basically just establishing this listener for the event. And we only need to establish that we want to listen to chat once. And then the component knows that after that, we're constantly listening for it. And every time that we do get the event, we are going to call it. But what this is saying is we only want to establish this sort of rule once in our React code. And you can put those sorts of things in a use effect. So that's it. And hopefully you have a very basic idea of how real-time communication works between multiple clients and the server.